Welcome back to episode 2 of the Commander Replay Podcast. We have a very special guest that I'm super excited to chat with today, a man who almost needs no introduction, but we'll give him a big one anyway. Bennie Smith, Commander Extraordinaire. Bennie has been producing Commander content since 2007. Bennie, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Not too bad. Have you played any Kaldheim yet?
I have bought a bunch of packs on Magic Arena and have built a few brawl decks. Have had a good time playing with some of the new commanders. That's one of the things I like to do with on Arena is build some brawl decks around the new legends to sort of get a feel for what seems to be cool and what seems to be not so cool.
Yeah, I've played a couple things so far. I've played Firja, which I'm really liking, and played Halvar. And I think the one card that jumped out at me, because it was in both decks, is Redain. I don't know why. I'm just happier when Redain is in play, especially when you strap some swords to it. So that's been a thing that's been super fun for me. This episode will probably come out like a little ways after it's been recorded, so Kaldheim hasn't officially been released in paper yet. By the time this comes out, it may actually be out in paper, but yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, my question to you is, when did you start playing Commander?
I started playing Commander back in 2007, so it's been 14 years.
I'm double checking the math on my fingers. Yeah, I think that's correct.
So I always, when I first played, I started playing Magic in 1994, and I basically got into it with some of my role-playing game buddies. So we started playing multiplayer Magic right away. Like, that was our preferred way of playing it. So I've always been a big fan of multiplayer Magic, even though I played tournament Magic too. I enjoyed that stuff. When I ran across, Sheldon was writing a couple articles about EDH early on when it was really taken off in the judge community. It sounded fun, so I kind of pitched it to some of my local multiplayer friends, and we started playing it, and we loved it, and soon the whole world seemed to be jumping on it too.
Yeah, so I remember maybe around 2009 or so, I was still doing like the standard F&M kind of thing, playing like somewhat competitively. I was definitely in that kind of like more spiky mindset, and I saw some people playing Commander at the shop, and also like the Commander players were just raiding my binder for these things that like I had no use for. And I'm like, cool, I need standard staples so I can build, the most aggressive standard decks ever. And,
right.
In hindsight, there's a few that I wish I held on to. I remember there was a foil Nimbus maze that I traded away that got very expensive. Yeah, wish I held on to that one. Few others that slipped away over that time too, but one story that I like to tell, usually I tell my significant other, I'm like, hey, I'm playing with Bennie today. I don't know anyone that's been playing Commander longer than you, and especially producing Commander content than you, outside of people on the rules committee.
Right.
And
yeah, I do feel like there wasn't much going on earlier. Like you said, wasn't outside of the rules committee sort of promoting the format. So I do feel fortunate that I kind of jumped on the EDH bandwagon pretty early with content.
Yeah, and it's just like super exciting to me. I kind of think of you like, I know Sheldon's the official godfather of the format, but I kind of think of you as like the second godfather of the format because, I remember reading your
junior godfather.
Godfather Junior. I remember reading some of your articles like 10 years ago, and reading some of that stuff on Star City Games back then. So yeah, man, super excited to have you here. But with that, we'll shift into today's topic, which is, was Commander more fun 10 years ago? What are your opening thoughts?
It was different, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was better or more fun. I mean, like you were just talking about, Commander or EDH players would come up to your binders and dig up these weird cards that you would never in a million years play. Like, that was definitely something that's kind of changed now. Commander drives prices now. So if there's something sweet in Commander, you're not going to find it in the bulk rares.
Yeah. And you know what the worst is? The worst is like cards that have been in my binder since then that like no one has picked up. Like, I think I've got a handful of Galvanoths I've still like to get rid of that just like, man, what do you do with this card? Like, if Commander players didn't want it 10 years ago, they especially don't want it now.
Right.
Yeah. So
I mean, that was a lot of fun back then because you would dig, you'd go into a store and they would usually have like bulk rare boxes that you could just flip through and spend, an hour, and you'd find like a stack of 20 cards that you're like, this would be sweet in this EDH deck, and then you'd go buy them and it would cost you, like $5.
Yeah. Here's what I did. I'm going to tell you how I built my first commander deck. The guy he wasn't the owner of the shop, but he was kind of the guy that was in charge of like running events at the shop that I played at. And he was similar in age to me. I was in my mid-20s at that point. Him and I used to draft a lot, and we were both very good drafters. So, like, the end of the night would always mean that I would have to face him in draft, and this was triple Innistrad. So I'd have, like, some green, white, or red, green aggressive deck, and he almost always had blue, white flyers, and the blue white flyers matchup was an absolute nightmare. And so like I knew if I wanted to, place first, second, or third, I had to go through him at the end of the night. Sometimes I got there and sometimes I didn't, but it was a lot of fun. Anyway, he decided that he's like, yeah, Commanders looks really cool. I'm going to start running Commander tournaments on Sundays. So I'm like, that sounds awesome. Let's do this. On Saturday, I rolled into the shop, started digging through the Dollar Rares box of black cards because I was building a Shieldred deck. And I spent like $100 on $1 cards to build my first Shieldred deck to win like $5 or $10 of store credit the next day. And
yeah, but you had a sweet deck.
Yeah, I did have a sweet deck. Right? I played that deck for years and years. It wasn't until later that I figured out that like the Praetors are really nasty cards.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, and so, that's kind of how I got into it. The thought of winning $5 or $10 store credit, I'll spend any amount of money to win, at least at that point in time. I've shifted gears a lot since, now I just play Commander and, kind of do it for fun and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was fun going through those boxes, just like, oh, this card looks cool, let's try this thing. And, no semblance of like how much ramp or how much removal you should run in the deck. I'm like, this thing looks awesome. It's 8 mana, jam it in there.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I actually fairly early on, when I was writing about Commander, I sort of brought a mana curve discipline to deck building. Just because I had played tournament Magic for so long, it was kind of ingrained in me that you want to at least pay some lip service to mana curve.
Yep.
But I mean, 14 years later, I think it's still not something a lot of people pay attention to. So I haven't been all that successful in encouraging people to pay attention to their mana curve.
It depends on who you're playing with. Like if you're playing with people that are ingrained in content and, they update their deck every time a new set comes out, those are the people that I think are going to pay close attention to their mana curve and what's going on. I think it's more if you get people that are playing like maybe a pre-con, they're newer to the game, or they're just like their interest in the game is more casual. Like maybe they bought a deck a few years ago and they play it a couple times here and there, but like don't spend time updating the deck. I would imagine that's where you're going to see like higher mana curves that are slower and they're not thinking about like how much ramp they should run, how much removal they should run. So it just depends on who you're playing. And because I've seen a lot of that stuff too, the shift between people that like consume content regularly and are, always looking for ways to, I want to say get an edge, even though I don't think that's quite right. Like you just want to make your deck run better or make it more fun or whatever its goal is. That's the thing that you're trying to do. But, versus people who aren't, what's the word I want? Crazy? I don't think crazy is the right word, but just have that level of interest, right? Their interest is much more casual than that. So, but yeah, no, I didn't figure out mana curve stuff until like, I don't know, 2017, 2018, something like that. Fairly recently in my Commander lifespan in the scheme of things.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still, even if somebody doesn't have a really good mana curve, I mean, the most important thing is that they're having fun with it. So
yeah, exactly. So
I don't frown too hard when I see really messed up mana curves.
Yeah, it's the type of thing, like if they ask me what they can change, it'll be like, all right, maybe I would do this, and this, and, drop a little bit here, add a little ramp at the beginning, usually solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason that I'm sort of militant about mana curve and stuff is that I want everybody to participate in the game, like, at all stages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I want you to have some plays to make from the early part of the game so that you're participating and you're interacting and, like if somebody's sitting back and, they've got a fistful of 5-drop cards and they've only drawn 3 lands and they're just sitting there, they're not having fun.
Yeah, I've definitely been down that road even recently. But that's a great segue point. So one of the things that I see on Twitter is, I'll see some number of people saying Commander was more fun 10 years ago. and that's kind of what this video was born out of. Drafting Commander Legends somewhat recently reminded me of the experience of playing Commander 10 years ago, which is that 10 years ago, you couldn't always impact the board. You know, I remember playing some games where it would get late into the game, you're past turn 10, you're empty-handed. At this point, I was playing like 6-man pods, so it might take a half hour or 45 minutes for your turn to come back. Right. You're just sitting there like, this sucks. I've got nothing going. Like, I don't know if there's a card in the deck that I can draw that will fix whatever is going on or at least give me something to do. Commander Legends reminded me of that. You get these like giant stalemates on the board and you're just like, I can't draw cards. I don't have a way to punch through. Their creature's bigger than mine, so I can't really go anywhere, but I need to leave blockers up. And I'm just like, I'm kind of stuck. I think I'm going to play a land and pass.
Right. Yeah, I haven't been able to draft Commander Legends, but I have played several sealed pools, and I definitely got that vibe where the game would kind of stall out. There didn't seem to be a lot of ways to sort of break through, be able to kind of break through board stalls. So I did really like the Monarch seems to help.
Yeah, it definitely helps a bit, but there's still a moment where, like, if someone has the Monarch and they have, I don't know, some big green creature with reach, and you're like, well, can't get it. Can't get to the Monarch. That solves that.
But like if the person stays the Monarch for a while, his card advantage is going to press it to the point where he should be able to break the board stall, right?
You'd hope.
Or else somebody else draws a Monarch card and then they become the Monarch, so it shifts around and stuff.
Right. I didn't draft a ton of Commander Legends, but after doing that just a couple times and kind of, hearing a lot of people have that same issue, it did remind me of like that old feel of Commander where the game would go long, and it's because people couldn't break through. There were way less combos. I think people were generally more hesitant about using combos back in the day. Right. You just end up with these giant stalemates of, who's going to be able to find a way through. Yeah, I have that feeling of sitting at my friend's house and just like, oh man, my commander costs like 19 mana to recast. No, I got shielded up to 19 mana one time. I didn't have coffers yet, so like without coffers, it's really hard to recast a 19 mana shielded.
Right.
Yeah, it just gave me that feeling. And so, I see people posting, I wish Commander would go back to the way it was. I'm like, I don't know. I like Commander 10 years ago, but there were definitely some problems. It got me thinking about the question, what is fun? What did you find fun about Commander 10 years ago, and what do you find fun about it now?
Well, I think 10 years ago, most of the people that were coming to Commander were sort of coming in with sort of pure motives, right? Like they wanted to play Commander kind of like it was designed, Sheldon and the Rules Committee, from the beginning, they've cultivated the format to be like a refuge from the competitive play.
Yep.
A handful of judges playing Magic, they're very competitive minded, right? They have very good knowledge of the rules and they're, steeped in tournament play. So like this was sort of their way to kind of sit back and play silly cards and have fun with their buddies. So I think in the early days, most people I think had that motivation. And I think these days because the format has gotten so big, there's corners of the format that don't have that same motivation.
Yeah.
They're more interested in sort of the puzzling aspect of like, how do I push this format to the breaking point, but don't break it, right? Because obviously it's super easy to break Commander.
Yeah, and especially now with all the stuff that's happened, like you look at competitive Commander and, you realize how strong this format can be. And, some days I played a lot of Magic Online where people don't always read comments and like show up at your casual game with the CDH deck. And then when someone does that, this format is like vintage light. And it's vintage right. Without 4 Force of Wills is what this format is. You're like, this doesn't feel great. But
so I would say, like my general thought on that, comparing it to 10 years ago, is I think there's a lot more people playing it that have different motivations than sort of the base core.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got into Commander because I'm like, this seems really cool. I want to try this. I think now there's at least some amount of people who get into it because that's just how a lot of people play Magic now. And it's like, right. Well, if I want to play with my friends, I guess I'm playing Commander because that's what they play. The motivation there is different. Not to say it's bad, but
right.
It's certainly
Yeah,
different.
it's not bad at all. It's just there's a lot more variables, I guess, to why people are playing, and that can kind of lead to some hard feelings or some bad play experiences where you're not really lined up.
Yeah. And, for me, one of the things that creates a bad play experience is when the power levels don't match. Looking back 10 years, how would you characterize the power level 10 years ago?
Well, there was some variability from people that had been playing Magic long enough where they had all the dual lands, and maybe they had Mana Vault or Mana Crypts, and I remember running across some of those people that had those kind of decks, and they certainly seemed overpowered compared to other people's stuff. But I think in general, the power level of the cards tended to be more even, I guess. You didn't have to have Rule Zero conversations, right? You would just say, hey, you want to play Commander, and everybody sit down, and generally everybody's decks were sort of on par.
Yeah. The way that I kind of think about it now is that back then, decks were less consistent, they were slower. It was harder to break those board stalls. The thing that I see now is that decks are consistent, they are faster, but I think the big thing, because a lot of people get upset about power level, and power level discrepancy certainly feels bad. Back then, there were a couple really powerful commanders. Some of the ones that come to mind are kind of the boogeymen of the format. Zur, Rafik, Ural. Who else was out there? What other boogeymen do you remember?
Well, those three that you mentioned were the ones that I was thinking of right away.
Yeah, those. Yeah, so even Zur back then would be like tame compared to Zur today. I faced a guy in a 1v1, a Magic Online, a couple times. I played him with like my best Winota deck. He was able to win consistently on turn 2 with Zur. Back in the day, I think they would get they would get a couple enchantments on Zur and kind of like Voltron it, probably with like a Necropotence, drawing a million cards and doing all that kind of thing. Now it's so consistent that they can like counter the first piece of interaction you play and consistently hit their combo pieces by turn 2 or 3 and just end the game. The one that I was looking at was like Adnaw's, Bolas Citadel, and Aetherflux Reservoir. And it's like insanity. But
I mean, that's just, you're playing vintage at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
The point of playing Commander.
yeah, exactly. But the thing that I like now is that you can build almost anything to be powerful because there have been so many powerful cards. Right? Back then, you had to choose a really powerful commander if you wanted to build a really powerful deck, generally. But now you can take almost anything and make it a strong deck if you want to. It's going to have a power ceiling somewhere. Like, you can't just take the worst commander and make it a CDH commander. Still no love for Anya. And I know there's people out there that like the challenge of playing Anya, but no love for Anya here. However, I was surprised about what I could do with Munda, because people also put Munda in that conversation of like worst Boros commanders, and you can actually build a pretty fun and pretty powerful allied tribal deck with it. And it's not because Munda is crazy strong, it's because the other cards in your deck are all very solid. They pick up that weight that Munda isn't able to carry. So, I see people get upset about the power thing, but the fact is, you can build just about anything to be very strong now. Back in the day, I think blue-black combo, some semblance of just like tutor for a 2-card combo was going to be the strongest thing you can do. Now you can build decks that can compete with that in just about any color and with just about any commander.
Yeah, definitely.
Curiosity, did you ever count the number of turns that a game would go about 10 years ago?
I actually never did. That's something that I know a lot of people do, and I think it's an interesting thought. But like, I guess my brain is just more focused on my cards in hand and the battlefield and trying to figure out who's the threat. And like, it never occurs to me to keep track of turns.
Yeah, and the only reason that I do it is because I play Magic Online a lot, and the turn count is right there, like in the bottom left corner for you. So you're always very well aware of what turn it is. Just doing that and producing as many videos as I've done, that I have a very good feel on the pace of the game. It's like, all right, well, it's turn 8. Someone's probably going to start trying to like end the game if they have their pieces in play on turn 8, versus if you just play like an Hour of Revelation, then everyone has to kind of set up again. You know what I mean? Just like, I'm curious to know what that timing is back in the day, because like I remember building my decks to plan for like turn 12 or, have some giant 15 mana play. Like, well, if it gets really late into the game, I'm going to need this giant thing that is, by today's standards would be like horribly overcosted, probably not game ending either. A card that I think of as like Stormherd.
Yes.
Like a card that would have been very reasonable 10 years ago, but today you're like, it's fine and you can win a game with it, but you probably want a deck built around it to really take advantage of it instead of just like jamming it in as the win condition.
Yeah, or like Insurrection.
You know what?
That would be the top end of your red X deck was Insurrection.
Yeah. You know what? I've been using Insurrection and Mob Rule a lot more, and I'm like, well, the creatures they're printing now are all really strong, so people just have more creatures in play. Insurrection has gained a lot of value, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. The fact that the creatures have gotten so much better. Just stealing all the creatures and swinging in is definitely more powerful than it used to be.
Yeah, if you're playing red, I have not found a better win condition than Mob Rule at 70 cents or whatever it costs. It either wins the game or is about to win the game and gets countered because it's about to win the game. Like, that's been my experience with Mob Rule. And maybe you have to wait a few turns for things to develop, but it's the type of card that, like, you can win the game with it without having a board state. If someone does, like, a one-sided wipe or something like that, or they use one of those blue spells that, like, bounces a single player or whatever, you can win from, like, almost no board state with a Mob Rule. And Insurrection, same thing, a little bit more mana, a little bit more pricey paper-wise, but, something I've thought about. What other cards do you remember from back then that you just, like, don't see anymore, that were, like, pretty common, people would use a lot, and be like, oh, you got to run this because, it's the best option for, it's either your best finisher or it's your best creature. Anything that comes to mind that you remember from back in the day?
Yeah, there was two particular green cards that I was thinking about that I used to run in all my decks, and I think everybody ran in their green decks, and it was Acidic Slime and Genesis.
Good cards.
Yeah, they still should be good, but I almost never see them, and I almost never put them in my own decks. I guess there's just better 5-drops these days.
Yeah, certainly creatures have gotten very strong, so, like, when you have creatures that cost more than 4 mana, even at 4 mana now, there's, like, just a lot of competition. Right. Acidic Slime has definitely showed up on some overrated card lists that I've been critical of in the past, but I think Acidic Slime is still a very solid card, mostly because it blows up lands. There are more powerful lands now than there have been at any point in the past. In addition to the old school stuff like Gaia's Cradle and Coffers, which are a problem, there's a million different ways to have a Maze of Ith now. There's like so many versions of a Maze of Ith that can be a problem.
Yeah.
Every commander set, there's usually like a utility land or two, to the point where there are more utility lands than you can reasonably fit into a deck. So you have to be like picky and choosy about which ones you really want. So
that is so true, because I used to, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I was a bit of a crusade for utility lands, that people needed to put more utility lands in their decks by people would cut lands for spells, and
yep.
I would push back and say, you need to add utility lands. And, and then people would be like, well, what utility lands should I add? And then, there was a handful of go-tos. But these days, there are so many that you have to pick and choose, which is a great problem to have, really.
Yeah, I think it was Magical Hacker that did a thing on Twitter about, they did like a little poll and kind of released some information, but they kind of figured out the amount of utility lands that you could optimally run depending on how many colors your deck is. And the one that jumped out at me is that in a 2-color deck, you could run 6 to 7 optimally without having too much mana trouble. And I think as you get to 3 colors or more, it dropped down to like 3 or so.
Right.
And, he released that information, and I found that, like, I hadn't thought about this specifically, like, in these, like, very numerical terms, but just from playing my decks over the years and kind of like, oh, well, got stuck on colors this game, maybe we should take one of these out. I noticed that all of my decks were within 1 of whatever numbers he was suggesting, just from playing a lot and be like, oh, this feels about right. And I know that I still cheat a little bit with my utility lands, especially like in my Boros decks, because they really provide a lot of value, and some of those things are just hard to make up in other places. Like, I use a lot of the card draw lands, getting a little easier with red, but Homeward Path is like a go-to for me because I play Voltron decks, so like I need my commander. There's no game without my commander.
Right. You don't want somebody stealing it.
Yeah, no, I've had Aurelia get stolen like a number of times over the years, and usually that player wins the game. It's
Right.
like Aurelia is a big play that will end the game, and if someone else has it, they will probably end the game. So, Homeward Path.
Right. Right. Like the
Um,
Simic player steals your Aurelia, and then they play, Sakashima copying Aurelia, and then they're swinging in with giant green creatures. And
yeah, I mean that works, but it's usually not even that wild. It's like they steal my Aurelia, they have like one other good creature in play already, and that's just kind of that. So, so yeah, I've definitely had that experience. Also, Homeward Path really good against black decks if they're running like Rise of the Dark Realms or stuff like that. If they reanimate your creatures, you're like, okay, I'll take that back. Thanks a lot.
speaking of card draw lands, how about the War Room?
Oh yeah,
That card,
so good.
I like bought 10 of them immediately. I was like, I got to get this in all my 1 and 2 color decks.
That was a great idea. I picked up a couple. I think I got 3 or 4. Probably still need a bunch more. I'll tell you what. Yesterday I filmed the mono white. I played some Halvar. The Halvar video will probably be up before this podcast. But as the mono white player, I outdrew and outramped the other 3 players at the table.
Oh man, that felt good.
Yeah, and I didn't use War Room a ton, but I did activate it at least once or twice. It's just that ability of like having these new cards, having these new options does help, especially with colors like white, where like white has been atrocious at drawing cards for years and years. And so every little bit like that really does help quite a bit.
I just love the design because it very much is designed to help monocolor decks or 2 color decks even.
Yeah.
That gives you a good reason to stick to 1 or 2 colors, right? Yep. Whereas Commander, the color fixing is so good. Why don't I just go ahead and play 3 colors? Or why don't I play 4 colors? Or why don't I play 5 colors, right? So
Yep.
I love that a land like that rewards you for just sticking with, 1 or 2 colors. Like it rewards you for that, which I think is great.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, which is colors. So let's try to get in the mindset of 10 years ago. I think it was generally more difficult to build more colors, at least in my opinion. You had less mana fixing, less color fixing. There were less commanders in each color by like some fairly significant amounts.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about some of the color stuff, because I think this is really interesting. I dug up a bunch of stats and just looked a bunch of things up. If you wanted to play a Shard commander, today the Shard commanders have between 15 and 19 available. Bant has 15 commanders. Naya has 19 commanders. And then the rest are at 19, 17, 17. If you wanted to play a 3-color Shard commander back in the day, you'd have about 7 to 10 available options. You always had the original Elder Dragon, the Invasion legendary dragons, right. Like Rith the Awakener. You had a couple cards out of Legends that may have been of varying quality.
Rith the Awakener was actually my very first EDH deck.
Oh, yeah? Rith is super cool. I've been wanting to build a Rith deck for a while. I will say that like one of my Patreons had a Rith deck that was like consistent turn 6 through some removal, and just like I brought my best deck, everyone else brought their best deck. They thrashed us in 3 or 4 games back to back with Rith. And I'm like, wow, Rith is still really good. So yeah, Rith is super, super cool.
You were talking about the shards available back then?
Yeah, so you'd have 7 to 10 commanders available of varying quality. In Naya, you had Jacques Levert, Johann Palladium Ors, kind of the lower end. Like, by today's standards, they would not hold up. You could probably make them work 10 years ago and they'd be fine, but wouldn't blow you away, would be my guess. Now, compare that to Wedge commanders. 10 years ago, before the first commander set came out, here's what you had available for Wedge commanders. Abzan had the most. Right now, there are 10 Abzan commanders. If you wanted to play Commander 10 years ago and build an Abzan commander, you had 2 choices. You had Doran and you had Teneb.
They were 2 fine choices, but that's not a whole lot of extra choices, is it?
No, it's not. And if you wanted to play any of the other wedges, only the Planar Chaos Dragon was available in those wedges.
Wow.
And so that first commander set came out, and then you'd get, 3 new wedge commanders in each of the precons, which, those made wedges playable.
3? I think there was 2 new ones and then a reprint of the
I think they reprinted the Planar Chaos Dragon. I think it might have depended on the set. I looked this up. I didn't write it all down because you would have gotten There were 3 in the Teamer set. You would have gotten Riku, Maelstrom Wanderer, and Animar.
Okay. I guess the fourth one was then.
Yeah, the fourth one might have been, and it might have varied by set. I don't know if it was like perfectly. I don't know if all of the precons were perfectly lined up like that, where they had the same exact number of them. I'd have to go look it up. If you wanted to build a wedge deck back then, you did not have a lot of options, and you had a few more options once the first commander set came out, but still, like 3 or 4 options still isn't a ton. Now, those commanders were pretty strong, most of them anyway. The ones, especially the ones that you still see play, you're like, oh man, why? Usually Maelstrom Wanderer. Maelstrom Wanderer is the one that's just like, why? Why did they print this card?
Right.
How do you feel about the power level of those commander precons, just out of my own curiosity?
Well, I mean, they were the first commander precons, right? That's what we're talking about, the first ones?
Yep, Commander 2011.
Yeah, I thought they were a great product. I was very excited about, products made specifically for the commander format. That was groundbreaking. As far as the power level, I don't think of them as unusually powerful, but they were amazing in that they opened up the options, right? They gave people more options, which was really amazing.
Yeah.
Was there like a new mechanic introduced in that one?
Oh.
That was an experience, right?
Experience was like 14, I think. Was there?
Okay.
Was Joined Forces in that set?
Joined Forces. That was a fairly bad mechanic.
Yeah, well, there's 2 that are really powerful in certain archetypes. That's Collective Voyage and Minds Aglow, and then the rest, meh. Collective Voyage still really good in a group hug, mass ramp kind of deck.
All right, so Kalia of the Vast was crazy powerful.
Yeah,
like I remember when I first started seeing people play that card, it was just insane.
Yeah, and I remember seeing that too, where just like, wow, why do they have so many things? It's like turn 5, and there's just, the board is flooded with angels, dragons, and demons. My wish is that they tone those commanders down just a teeny bit. Like, I like the product. I think it was cool. I was excited about it when it came out also. But with the clarity of hindsight, especially the more powerful ones, like Kalia, Animar, Maelstrom Wanderer, are kind of the ones that jump out at me, that like they're all a little bit too good. Kalia's fine these days because people know to shoot it, so it usually never survives more than a turn. But the value that you get off Maelstrom Wanderer is still just insane.
Right. Yeah, and Damia decks were pretty broken too if people built them right.
Yeah, especially if games were still going longer, then you're just drawing way more cards than everyone else. Yeah, Damia is going to take over a game. I've definitely lost to it a lot of times.
And I had a Skullbriar deck for a while that was kind of ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
Though I think at the time it was held in check a little bit by the tuck rule, right? That you could tuck commanders and stuff. So
that's a great point. I completely forgot about that. The tuck rule existed back then. So,
yeah, well, I guess the tuck rule didn't exist, but you could tuck commanders into decks.
Well, they hadn't made a rule saying you couldn't do it, I guess is the best way to phrase it.
Exactly.
So cards like Condemn, Spell Crumble, there's another blue counter spell that does it. I can't remember it. I haven't seen it in years. But yeah, powerful commanders would be held in check by just tucking them into the deck, which felt terrible. Like, it feels so bad.
It really did.
But on the other side of it, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it was a good change that they made, I think, overall for the format. But definitely there was a lot of people that were very upset about it because that was their special defense against abusive commanders.
Yep. So if you were playing like black or green, it was somewhat easy to get your commander back because of the tutors. If you're playing the other 3 colors, it was miserable trying to get your commander back.
Right.
So, I was definitely happy when they got rid of that rule. Again, I was playing a lot of 1v1 Magic Online, kind of in the between 2012 and 2015. The tuck rule everywhere. You would lose your commander almost all the time. So I was happy when that one went away. However, I've seen some people kind of chattering lately that maybe it's time to bring it back because things have gotten so crazy that have you ever faced a powerful Golos deck?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or
I had a Golos deck briefly that was just ridiculous.
Yeah, every time it comes in, it's getting a new land, so it's probably making enough mana to continually recast itself. Maelstrom Wanderer has that same issue where they never don't have enough mana to recast Maelstrom Wanderer. So I think it's a lot of the 5-color commanders that are really kind of over the top these days. If you could tuck them, wow, that would solve a lot of problems. I would feel much less threatened if I could tuck the opposing Golos player, because at least it would slow him down for a little while.
But I think they should make more cards that are like Trapped in the Moon, or what's that card?
Imprisoned in the Moon, yep.
Imprisoned in the Moon, or like the newly tooled Oubliette.
Oh, yep.
You know,
I think just about every color has one, probably except red. I don't think red has one that I can think of, but there's a few in white. There's like one or two in green, one, maybe two in blue. Black's not really hurting for removal, so I'm not too worried about it.
Right. Yeah. Like, I think if maybe they made more cards like that, it would be helpful for keeping some of those problematic commanders in check, that you can't rely on people making good choices and not playing them.
Yeah. Yeah, so like, if I see a Golos deck or something now, like, I tend to bring a deck full of hate bears, and then they're miserable. Right. And it's sort of this thing, like, generally I am in favor of new Commander. Like, this question of, was Commander more fun 10 years ago? Most of the time, I think Commander is more fun now. I still have some fond memories of 10 years ago, and there's still a lot of things I liked. One of the things that I don't like about now is that a card like Yarok is... You can just be like, oops, this deck is too strong. Like, I didn't mean for Yarok to be this insane, but if you play any ETB creature with Yarok, it just gets out of hand, like, almost instantly.
Right.
And so, like, when I see a deck like Yarok or Golos or something like that, I've been playing a lot more hate bears in my deck, and I don't want the game to be this way, but it's kind of this, like, well, I have to play these hate bears because you do literal everything if I don't. But by me having these hate bears or these stack pieces in play, you don't get to do anything at all. I feel a little bad about that, but not so bad that I'm going to stop running them, because having faced a deck like, let's say Marin. Marin's another one that I've just hated for years. You play a Rest in Peace against Marin, they do nothing for most of the game, at least until they can get rid of it. But it's like, if I don't do that, then you just do everything and the game's just over. It's like, bring a different deck and we don't have to play like that, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's certain commanders that are just relentless and overpowering, right? That, like, if you don't keep them in check from the beginning, like, if everybody doesn't gang up on them, they're just going to run you over. And I just feel like that's no fun for the person playing the commander, unless that's sort of kind of the thing that they like to do. But, like, if they don't like playing archenemy, they're not going to enjoy that.
No.
And then everybody else has to set aside the cool things that they wanted their deck to do, because they have to just keep mana open and constantly interact with them just to have a shot. And I wish they would stop printing those kind of commanders. I feel like there's people that are designing for Commander that don't understand Commander.
I do agree with that. If you take, like, every Commander set has a couple of really push commanders, and then, like, probably 10 commanders that are all fine. But there's always, like, anywhere between, like, 1 and 4 commanders that are just like, oh my god, I never want to face this commander again. Marin is the one from that set.
Right.
Yeah, I do hate that, like, they're so pushed and they're so powerful that you force the game into these archenemy states, or you force them into this, like, well, it's either you have all the fun or I play this hate bear and stop you from having any fun at all, because then I don't get to have fun if you just end the game on me. You know what I mean? I don't like that direction of where the game's heading personally, but the fact that, like, Go ahead.
Well, like, it blows my mind that they made, first off, they made Tulane, right? Which is just an absurdly ridiculous card.
Yep.
And then, everybody was very vocal about that this was a dumb design. Then they designed that new Simic commander from the commander decks that's like
AC?
Basically, what was it?
AC, Tyrant of Gyre Strait.
Yeah, like, why would someone design that now?
Yeah,
like,
why does it need to be Tatiova with Exploration? Every Tatiova deck already runs Exploration, and every copy of Exploration.
How could you possibly have any idea of how Commander works and how people give you feedback, and then you go and make AC? Like, what?
Yep.
What are you doing?
Yeah, like, Simic is probably already... It's one of the, like, strongest two-color pairs already. The things you can do in Simic. When you talk about, like, power level and, like, Rule Zero conversations, it's genuinely difficult to evaluate a Simic deck if you've never seen it before. Like, if someone's like, hey, I've got this Simic deck, it's like, they'll say it's a 7. It's not the same 7 that you have, right? Their deck is going to ramp and draw like there's no tomorrow. And unless your deck is planning to ramp and draw or like play some very interactive stacks type of game, stopping them from doing that, then you're probably going to have a pretty bad time.
Right. Yeah, they can make good, interesting Simic legends. Like Coma, I think, is a very interesting, cool, legendary creature for Commander fans.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that card?
Let me give it a read.
Yeah, it's from Kaldheim.
I haven't fully digested everything. I've read it a little bit. I haven't fully digested everything it means. So we got a 7-mana 6/6 that can't be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token that's named Coma Coil. Sacrifice another serpent. Choose one. Tap target permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated, or it gains indestructible until end of turn. Honestly, I would say that still does a little too much in my opinion. It's not as insane as some other Simic commanders, but it's still like, I would say that's still above kind of like the average of what I would expect out of a legendary creature in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is 7 mana.
It is 7 mana. So, I mean, they'll probably...
It doesn't have any evasion.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'd expect them to cast it around like turn 3 on that 7 mana.
Well, that's true.
But like,
I mean, that's another discussion, right? Is the tools available to make pretty much Simic Commander kind of absurd.
Yeah, you know what a game I posted the other day, 9 mana on turn 3 with a black-white deck.
Yeah, I've run across I think last time I played against a Boros deck, they had something like 8 mana on turn 3.
Was it me?
Was it what? Was
it me playing that Boros deck?
I don't know. Was it?
I don't know.
Did I say something like?
it probably was because like I
maybe it was.
I choose to ramp very hard in my Boros decks, which allows me to do silly things. It's okay if it wasn't. I was just genuinely curious.
Yeah, it may have been. It may have been. I'm traumatized. I can't pull up the full memory.
That's fine. That's totally fine. But like, yeah, I mean, I made 9 mana on turn 3 in a black-white deck the other day.
and that's another thing. I think people play way too much ramp in their decks because of green's ramp, right? Everybody feels like they have to ramp just to keep up.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to look at that. There's the I got to keep up with the green deck, and I got to keep up with everyone else. But there's me, like, also on the I want to cast all these 8 and 9 drop angels. The best way to do that is to ramp really hard.
Right. If you had early plays and interactions, the game would go on long enough for you to cast those big angels, right?
Theoretically, but I don't want to run 47 board wipes either. Like, that's not going to be a great time for anyone. Like, that's a thing that I could do. I choose not to do it because it's a more enjoyable game if I just ramp and run a responsible number of board wipes, like 5 or 6, but...
Well, when I say interaction, I'm not talking about board wipes. I'm talking about pinpoint removal and just playing early drop creatures and stuff onto the battlefield to do stuff.
Yeah. So here's an interesting point. My removal mindset is still somewhat old school. I mean, it's had a shift just because there's been so many changes over the years. I'm still like a 5-ish board wipes kind of guy. That comes from playing like 10 years ago, you know, that period between like 2010, 2015. 5 board wipes was kind of like the accepted number back then. What blows my mind is that the creatures have gotten stronger and people run less board wipes.
Right.
And I'm like, what are you doing? Have you seen the creatures? They're insane. Like, look at Coma. Coma is going to produce a lot of power one trip around the table. 4 3/3s. It's similar to, what's the green card out of Ixalan? Tendershoot Dryad. Okay. It's very similar to Tendershoot Dryad. It's a little bit more mana, but the creatures give you more utility than Tendershoot Dryad. Tendershoot Dryad, 2 trips around the table is like practically table lethal damage.
Yep, absolutely.
And so when I evaluate Coma, that's what I'm thinking in my head. I'm like, okay, it's that card, which is already like on the strong side, with more abilities attached to it. One of them is protection, and the other one is locking your stuff down. So... Is it as broken as other Simic commanders? Probably not, but I still think it's going to be very strong, and I'm not looking forward to facing it anytime soon.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Commander, there's a lot of exile effects that can handle Coma as well.
Sure. Like I said, I generally don't mind the power creep, but there are, like, it's the things that kind of jump far and beyond. You know, when you see a card like Nyx Bloom Ancient, which you have to shoot immediately, combined with, like...
I hate that card exists.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, me too. And then you have, like, the new Kodama, which you have to shoot immediately. there can only be so many you have to shoot immediately cards before like one of them's going to stick. Again, I don't want to have to run 20 to 25 pieces of removal in a deck just to play a game of Commander. Like, I can do that. I can make that choice, but it's going to be a miserable time for everyone.
Right.
And, you know, Coma, it's kind of that same sort of thing, is that, well, if you have a bunch of green creatures that I already have to shoot, then this is just one more of those, and it protects itself. So, yeah, I think it's a little strong, but that's my opinion on it.
The point I was making, though, is that I wish that Wizards would understand that they can do other things with Simic.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite Simic commander is Experiment Crotch. I just always love that card.
Is that the one you put a +1 counter and it gains all the abilities of things with +1 counters?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's a cool card. Like, it's fun. I haven't really even seen a Crotch deck in years, so I'm not sure what like the top end of that deck, or like what the cool stuff you get to do with that deck is now. What are some of the big interactions in that deck that are like, this is awesome when this happens?
Well, I don't know. I haven't played a Crotch deck in years either. I just remember building a Crotch deck back in the day and just loving it, right? And everyone's like, why are you playing Experiment Crotch when you can play Momir Vig? I'm like, because Experiment Crotch is fun.
Yeah. Momir Vig is like, go get Craterhoof, win the game. Or, right. You know, whatever thing you want, like if you wanted to win with like Deadeye Navigator or whatever it was. There's a card you don't see anymore, Deadeye Navigator.
God, I hate that card with such a white-hot passion. I'm glad
same.
that people don't seem to play it much anymore.
Yeah, me too. That definitely lost a lot of games with Deadeye Navigator. Here's some cards. So we've been talking about like powerful creatures, things that you would see 10 years ago. You would see a Deadeye Navigator. The game would probably end. One you don't see much of anymore, Palinchron, used to end a lot of games.
Yeah.
Here's a couple that you don't see for good reason. Primeval Titan. Sylvan Primordial, and Prophet of Krufix.
Gee, I wonder why we don't see those anymore.
Yeah. So all of those were banned, not exactly 10 years. At exactly 10 years, Primetime was the only one that was in, but within the next few years, we saw the others. For anyone that didn't play 10 years ago, the game would kind of look like this. A Primetime would come down, and then it was just a race to clone, blink, reanimate, and steal the Primetime and get as many triggers with it as you could. That was the entire game.
Sometimes if Primetime wasn't involved, sometimes that would involve Seedborn Muse.
Yeah. Also, still a very real card. Like, if you gave me a couple cards to ban, that one's going to be in my top 10. It's not the first thing I would get rid of, but it's probably around like 7 or 8.
Yeah, I vividly remember an early game of EDH where like it literally someone played Seedborn Muse and then someone else killed it and then someone else reanimated it.
Yep.
And then someone else cloned the Seedborn Muse and then killed the reanimated Seedborn Muse. And so like the last person that kept Seedborn Muse won because of all the mana that they got.
Yeah. And I've seen that exact line, except with Primetime. Same exact thing. Just someone shoots it, okay, reanimate, and then you're like, okay, I steal it with treachery or whatever I've got, and you know, it's just that game of who can get the most Primetime triggers or who can hold Seedborn Muse the longest and find their win.
Right.
There's a great point here. We mentioned a word that you don't see as many, or a card type you don't see as much of anymore. Clones. The legend rule was different back then. The legend rule was changed. It was changed multiple times over the years. I'm not going to go through like every iteration, but the two that matter are when Magic 2010 came out, it said that if you cloned a commander, both cards would be destroyed, and that was anyone's commander. So a clone could always be used as a kill spell on someone's commander, or you could clone the Primetime when it came out. So if you were playing blue, you would always run some number of clones in a deck just because it was a very good piece of utility to have around. You know, at one point I actually thought about building a clones deck back then. I never quite had all the pieces for it, but because you could just be like, wow, I have repeatable removal on everyone's commander, or I just copy the best creature in play, right?
Right. It's like a win-win, whichever way you want. It's a great card. It's a great card.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's always going to be useful to you because it's going to do one of these things.
And what was also nice about them is it kind of would scale with the power level of the decks you were playing, right? So if everybody's playing clunky, silly creatures, then that's the clones that you're making, right?
Yep. If you were playing in a group that wasn't going the Primetime route, whatever big dumb thing that they had, you're just like, okay, I'll have a big dumb thing also. And like,
Yep.
is Rocks legendary? Rocks might be legendary. Probably not Rocks, but like the big green, like either has trample or has the super trample ability, which is the Rocks ability, something like that. You're like, okay. But yeah, it was nice because it would keep the games, you wouldn't fall so far behind. If they had something good, you're like, okay, I clone it. Now I have something good too. And maybe a board wipe happens, maybe it doesn't. But yeah, the legend rule changed. It was then changed again in 2013 to its current, which is that the legend rule only affects that player now. So only one player can't have two cards with the same name. They get to choose the one copy they want to keep. So that was actually a big change for Commander, because after that, you're like, well, I guess I don't run 47 clones in my deck anymore, because they're no longer a kill spell on someone's commander. They're still decent, and they still give you that ability to, like, well, if someone else plays something big, I can have something big too, and I'm probably doing it on less mana than they spent doing it. So they still have some value, but like, I remember running a lot of clones in my deck back in the day, and it's just not a thing that you do anymore because the legend rule has changed.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I have a non-commander fun story to tell about the way the legend rules used to work way back in the day.
Go for it.
I won states in 1999 with basically a mono green deck that was a Gaia's Cradle deck, so it was absurd with the mana production.
Yep.
And in the sideboard, I had Deepwood Elder in the sideboard as my mirror technology. So Deepwood Elder is a 2 green mana for 2/2 spell shaper, and you could spend 2 green mana and X, discard a card, and X target lands became forests until the end of the turn. So if I was facing another Gaia's Cradle deck, the way the legend rules used to work is if another legend would come into play, if there was already a legend out that had been out longer, the new one would be destroyed. The first legend would have sort of primacy. Like, you had to get rid of the original.
Yes. I've heard stories about that where the first one to land a Lin Civi would just win the game because the other player couldn't play a Lin Civi. And then at some point after that, I think I saw when I was looking at things earlier, I think it was 2004, they changed it to the more recent one got to stay in play. So you would run Umezawa's Jit to be a removal spell for Umezawa's Jit.
Right.
But at this point in time,
So what I would do is I would turn my opponent's Gaia's Cradle into a forest, and then I would play my Gaia's Cradle, and then when theirs turned back to Gaia's Cradle, they'd have to sacrifice it.
Wow. Does that work? Does that work under the rules?
It worked at the time.
It worked at the time?
Don't obviously doesn't.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Doesn't work now, but
that's a nice piece of tech.
The one person I played against was like called a judge, got really salty about it. They were very upset about it, which of course made it even more fun for me.
Yeah, especially if you took that one all the way to victory. That's awesome, man. But yeah, so the legend rule has had a lot of iterations. When they changed that rule, that's a big impact on Commander, because at one point clones were very good. Now clones are fine; they're not insane or overpowered or anything. But yeah, back 10 years ago, you run a bunch of clones.
Yeah, another rule that they changed that was kind of interesting. I think it was like 2016, where you were able to produce mana outside your color identity.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that change. Yeah, so if you had a Birds of Paradise, Fellwar Stone, any of those type of things, you couldn't produce mana outside of your color identity. Now you can, which generally becomes relevant if you steal someone else's thing and want to pay for some activated ability, or if you're trying to cast cards.
If you clone somebody's creature that has an activated ability outside of your color identity, that would give you the ability to use it, which I think was kind of a cool change.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a positive change also, because it almost felt like, there's no real reason to not allow this. I get what they were doing when they started the format and built that restriction in, but I'm like, that was a positive change, I think.
One other card I wanted to bring up that I used to have in all of my commander decks was Nem Death Mantle.
Oh yeah.
I just love that of course, as you were bringing up, everybody played board wipes all the time, so that was sort of my anti-board wipe tech. Of course, you had to leave up 4 mana, which was very problematic.
Yeah.
Which is probably why I don't really play it all that much anymore, but at the time it was pretty sweet.
I think there's a lot to say, and it's it'll probably be hard to go through it here, but just what it means when decks are less consistent and the amount of mana you can produce as a result of the game just going longer and just like naturally making land drops, versus kind of the way the game is now, where, you know, if you talk about like the more powerful settings, you know, even like mid power and up, just the focus on ramp. So now it's not just making your land drops, but it's also getting ahead of your opponents really quickly. You can produce a lot of mana quickly now, which some of the tools were still available back then. I looked through Green's cards. A lot of the green ramp pieces were all available 10 years ago. So like Green's ramp hasn't changed that much, but it does have more pieces. It has more options available. But like, I looked at the top 50 cards in Green. I looked at all the colors actually, but most of them are still, you know, most of them were available 10 years ago, and a lot of them are still cards you would run now. Here, I'll indulge you a little bit. 10 years ago, of the top 50 green cards on EDH Rec, 35 of them are still in the top 50 today. So 10 years ago, green had a lot of power. Here's a couple that will jump out. Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Rampant Growth, Farseek, Sakura Tribe Elder, Llanowar Elf, Birds of Paradise, Eternal Witness. And then if you want like if you want a finisher, you've got Avenger of Zendikar, still a big one that shows up. Beastmaster Ascension was available at that time. So, you know, I went through this exercise of looking at the top 50 cards in each color. Let me throw a few stats at you. So we got 10 years ago, you'd have 35 of the top 50 available in green. In white, you would have 22 of the top 50 available. But I also looked at what white picked up in the past 5 years. White has picked up 17 cards in the top 50 over the past 5 years. So white's still in a weird place when it comes to like filling in gaps in their game plan.
Right.
You actually want to jump out at me? Cards for green in the last 5 years that are in the top 50, a lot of card draw. You've got Guardian Project, Beast Whisperer, Zendikar Resurgent, Rishkar's Expertise, Shamanic Revelation, I think, Return of Wild Speaker. So like a lot of card draw there, and then like 1 or 2 tutors with Finale of Devastation, so a finisher.
Is the Great Henge in there?
Great Henge didn't make the top 50, and that's probably for price.
Yeah, that's true.
And
but yeah, there is a lot of great card draw that they've put in green.
Yeah, so like when I went through this exercise, green's top 50, it didn't get so much ramp. It got a lot of card draw is where it really picked up a lot of stuff. And I think that's kind of what pushed it over the top as like one of the most powerful colors, is that you had all this ramp. Now you have all the card draw. You're kind of doing most of the things you want to be doing in this format.
Right. Yeah, you're getting cards to use that mana for.
Yeah.
Much more than to be.
But you made a great point with the Great Henge not being there. You know, this is an imperfect exercise, so it's the top 50. There are a lot of great cards that are not in the top 50 on EDH Rec. I noticed this when I did Red, because a lot of great red cards in Commander Legends, or even over the past 2 years, and not all of them showed up in the top 50, even though I think some of them should, because they're just that good. We'll look at Red. 10 years ago, you'd have 18 of the top 50 available for Red. Yeah, so I mean, they picked up, 32 cards? Over the last 10 years, just in the top 50. And again, that doesn't even account things like Jessica's Will isn't on that list because it's too new. A lot of the things from 2020 aren't on that list because they're too new. And in the last 5 years, they've picked up 11 cards. You know, one that jumps out is Dockside Extortionist, just the most insane Magic card ever printed.
You know, talking about cards that people fight over.
Yeah, now the game is fight over this Dockside Extortionist. Steal it, clone it, blink it, whatever.
Right. Yeah, like last time I played Dockside Extortionist, I played it for like, I got like 2 treasures out of it, and then it got killed in a board wipe, and then someone like cast body double on it to copy it when like there was a million artifacts out, and they basically just went off on my Dockside Extortionist in the graveyard.
Yep. And, you know... 10 years ago, mana production didn't look like that. So, right. You know what I mean? That's the type of thing that ends a game because you've got 20 extra mana or something now because, you know, you blinked the Dockside Extortionist. You couldn't do that 10 years ago. And I think it's this interesting question in my mind of like, all right, if you want to go back and play Commander from 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, Dockside Extortionist is not something that you would have at either 5 or 10 years. And you can't produce mana the same way, which allows the game to go longer. So, you know, I think your natural land drops play a bigger role in your mana production. Still, there's things like Gilded Lotus and Thran Dynamo and stuff, but you don't have these like giant bursts of mana that Dockside that give you, with Dockside also being a creature that you can do all the stuff, you know, to abuse the creature body that you don't get with like, let's say, a Mana Geyser. Mana Geyser is just harder to cast a second time, but...
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. Look, blue I found really interesting also. In the blues top 50 over the last 5 years, it's only picked up 9 cards. A couple counter spells, dramatic reversal, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, Thassa's Oracle, Spellseeker. So like blue was
that's kind of wild.
yeah, like blue was one of those stronger colors for a number of years. And when you kind of look at what they had a lot of things 10 years ago. The things they got were better win conditions or better iterations of counter spells. Within the past year, they've picked up a few things that make mana, like Hull Breacher, Thieving Skydiver if you steal Mana Rock, and who is it? Malcolm? It's also good if you're trying to make some extra mana. So, it kind of speaks to like who had holes in their game plan, over the past 10 years and who didn't. Looking at the list of cards from Blue 10 years ago, 25 of 50 were available. So literally half.
I expect Raven Form from Kaldheim will be jumping onto that list in the near future.
Yep. I would agree with that also. It just looks like too good of a piece of removal to not run. Especially like it fills in a gap in Blue's game plan, which is artifacts are hard to get rid of in Blue.
Right.
And then to finish it up, since we've done all the other colors, Black I thought was also interesting. Black had 28 of 50 available 10 years ago, and only 11 cards have, in the last 5 years, have made its way into the top 50 for Black. And 10 years ago, Black had everything going. It had mana doublers, it had removal, it had card draw, it had reanimation, it had all of its bases covered. So when you think about like what a Black card has to do to be impactful, it needs to be really good. And one of the new ones that jumps out is Torment of Hellfire, a better finisher.
Yeah. That card is crazy.
Yeah, or Bolas Citadel.
Remember people used to complain about Exsanguinate?
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy if they run Exsanguinate. Like if they play an Exsanguinate now, I'm just like, well, I'm glad it's not a Torment of Hellfire, because with the game's going less turns now, it's harder to pump a ton of mana into an Exsanguinate. Like it's hard to get to that place where Exsanguinate is actually lethal on you. Like it might get you for a lot and they'll probably gain a lot, but you're not actually just dead. Right. Where, when the game goes to turn 15 and you've made 15 natural land drops, and your mana doubler's still alive, yeah, you can make a really easy lethal Exsanguinate.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was some stat stuff that I delved into, and I know it's not perfect, but I thought it was interesting seeing like what was available 10 years ago, and it's kind of got this thing in my mind of like, we should go build some decks that are only from the card pool 10 years ago or earlier, and see where that gets us, because the cards have changed, but also like the mindset has changed too, right? Like the way people build is different. If you told me to build a good Boros deck using cards from 10 years ago or earlier, I could still build you a pretty solid deck just because my knowledge of the game has improved.
Absolutely. I wonder if Scryfall would be able to search that way, where you could limit it by the year.
I'm not as proficient with Scryfall. I tend to use Gatherer still. Gatherer, that sounds like a nightmare, but yeah, that might be that may be worth checking out. Also, the set that came out 10 years ago would have been Mirrodin Besieged. So that's kind of what I was using as my cutoff when I was looking at a lot of this stuff.
Okay, yeah.
How has your deck building changed over the last 10 years?
It's basically the same. My general thing with building decks is if it excites me, then I want to build it. And if the deck doesn't excite me to play it anymore, then I'll just take it apart. I have some decks that I've had a long time that I still love to play. But if I get tired of a deck, or if it doesn't really do what I want it to do, I take it apart. And the pandemic has made, for some reason, I've gone into a deck building frenzy. I have like 31 decks made now.
Wow,
which is kind of crazy.
A lot. I've got about 12. I find that when I get above 10, especially like we're not going places, but when you're trying to go to like an event or something, it's pretty unmanageable to bring them all.
Oh yeah.
I use a backpack still, and that's like not the most efficient for that. I probably need to get one of those boxes, like the big case that everyone uses that you can put like, I don't know how many like 20 decks in it or something, but
right.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a ton of decks. That is a lot. And
well, before the pandemic, I used to have anywhere from like 10 to 13 decks, and I could probably put most of them in a backpack.
Yep.
So I would take them to, SCG Con or Command Fest or whatever.
Right.
Definitely, if whenever we're back to going to those sort of things, I'll have to pick and choose which decks that I take.
Yeah, absolutely. 30 decks is like, it's just really heavy. That's like more than you can carry. Right. I knew a guy that used to use like a roller suitcase thing, like the overhead thing that you put on an airplane to carry his stuff. But I don't know how many decks you can fit in that, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable hauling around 30 decks.
Yeah, that's also true because it's like, you might have that many. Like I have 12. I play 5 of them regularly. There's, a bunch that just don't see play. So
Yeah, like when I would go to SCG Con to play Commander all weekend, I could usually roll through, all 12 decks at some point during the weekend. And that was kind of my goal.
yeah,
Basically not to play a game with one deck more than once.
I go the opposite way. I either play what I feel like playing, or I'll try to adjust to what everyone else is doing, which means that not all of my decks are like on the same level. So like if one's older and I haven't updated it in 2 years, then I'm probably not pulling it out unless I know I'm at a table that's going to be like really chill. So,
Right.
it just depends, but that tends to work itself out where I bring 10 or 12 decks, I play 5 or 6 of them, and that's kind of what happens. At one point I realized after an event playing like, I don't know, I think I played 20 games in 3 days. I realized that all my decks kind of do the same thing. It's like cast commander, put equipment on it. Doesn't matter what commander it is, doesn't matter what colors it's in, it's always some variation of that theme.
That's what they like to do. One of my favorite color combinations is Golgari, and I have always loved Graveyard Recursion, though Marin I think goes over the line, so I don't like Marin either.
yeah, like Graveyard Recursion is cool and it's fun and powerful, but like Marin is a bridge too far.
Yeah, that went too far. But what was funny is a year or two back, I realized that like I had also built. So my Graveyard Recursion deck right now is Glissa the Trader, so it has a lot of
it's a cool deck.
artifact recursion.
Yep.
But I realized that I have a Felden deck, which is basically kind of a Graveyard Recursion deck.
Yep.
It doesn't really recur creatures, but it copies them.
Them. It's very cool. Yeah.
So I would joke that was my mono red Golgari deck.
Yeah, Felton's a cool deck. I've seen it a few times. It can do some things. It values.
Yeah. And then I had a Teshar deck, which recurs stuff from the graveyard too. So I was like, that's my mono white Golgari deck.
Yeah. Just reanimation in all the colors.
Right.
You mentioned your favorite guild. My favorite guild, many people know this, is Boros. 10 years ago, actually, well, right now, there are 33 Boros commanders, not including the partners in Commander Legends. Complicates the math a bit. But 10 years ago, there were 4. Wow. Agris Koss, Brian Stoutarm, Jorkadine, and Razia.
Yeah, that's not a lot of choices.
No, it's not a lot of choices. So, like, one of the cool things you get over time is more choices in each color. Aurelia showed up around 2013, 2012, 2013, something like that. And, that's been my go-to more or less since that time. It probably took me about a year to kind of adopt her as a commander. But, people are like, I want to go back. That list of Boros commanders does not excite me terribly. If you said I had to build the strongest one of those, I would say Jorkadine is probably the strongest of that group. But
right.
I know the game was different back then. Like, I knew a guy who played Brian Stoutarm, and, he would just fling a big creature at you, and sometimes that would kill you.
Yep.
But
I had a Jorkadine mirror deck. It was a mirror tribal with Jorkadine was sort of the quote-unquote tribal leader because he would give them all.
Yeah, it makes him huge. Yeah, 3-0 is pretty big. How did that deck perform?
It was definitely low-powered.
Okay.
Because at the time, Boros didn't have any of the sweet toys it has these days. But
yeah. Do you know about when? Like, doesn't need to be exact, but just like give or take.
It was 10 years. It was probably closer to 10 years ago.
Closer to 10 years. Okay. Yeah. There were still powerful things. There were obviously like way less powerful things, but like knowing what I know now, I could probably build you like quote unquote the best version of a powerful Boros deck back then. But it's also like part of it's that knowledge of the game has changed. However, the tools that they've printed over the last, 2 to 5 to 8 years are also really, really helpful. Like Sword of the Animist is one of the best cards in Boros. And I've also been really loving like Dowsing Dagger, which is also like a $4 card now or something. So,
wow.
Yeah, like those things help a lot with your ramp in Boros.
Absolutely.
And, the card draw in red has obviously gotten way better too. So, yeah, I could definitely see that deck like having some struggles even back then, but
well, and at the time too there was a lot of mass removal that people played, so, you'd play a couple of mirrors and right before you played Jorkadine, somebody cast the Wrath of God and then you're like, well, there's all my dead mirrors in the graveyard.
Yeah, and one of the things that White has picked up a lot of in the last like 5 years or so, a lot of board wipe protection. has showed up, and like one really good one into Fairy's Protection, and then a bunch of like less good ones but still impactful. Eerie Interlude, Flawless Maneuver, you know, a number of others that it gives you a tool against that. Like, well, if everyone's playing this piece of removal, it gives you a good thing. Just like, well, cast this Eerie Interlude, and all my stuff's still alive. Now I'm kind of in the driver's seat. So,
yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about all the changes that have come over the years.
Yeah. So
one thing I was looking at some old deck lists from some old articles, and I ran across a card that I think I might want to dig out of the deck boxes. Is Rift Sweeper.
Rift Sweeper, yeah.
Because there's some really powerful foretell cards out there, and I think Rift Sweeper can maybe can Rift Sweeper hit those? Actually, it just occurred to me that if it's face down, I might not be able to hit it with a Rift Sweeper.
Oh man.
Let me pull it up real quick. Oh, it's only face up.
It's only face up.
Oh well, sorry, Rift Sweeper. You're still not very good.
I have seen people use Rift Sweeper a little bit more recently. It's good if you're playing a combo deck and you need that combo to happen. So like CEDH,
right?
You know what I mean? You need that thing in your deck, and whether it's exiled or not. So I have been seeing it a little bit. Not like an everywhere all the time type of card, but certain places.
Yep. Nope. Sorry, Rift Sweeper. I was wrong.
All right. So, I think I know your answer, but given the choice, would you go back 10 years and like only play that style of commander if that choice were given to you? Like if we could remove all the powerful nonsense, the powerful finishers, the crazy ramp cards, would you take that option?
I absolutely would not. I'm very excited about the new options these days, even though there's some ridiculously overpowered commanders that they've printed. There's no rule that says you have to play them. So, but there's just so many interesting commanders that have been made over the past 5 to 10 years that I'm just constantly amazed at all the different cool ideas that you can come up with. Plus, with all the partners in Commander Legends, I mean, that's just, we'll be discovering interesting interactions with those creatures for years to come.
Yeah. I like and I dislike the partner mechanic. I like what they did in Commander Legends because it's monocolor and it's fun and there's a lot to explore there. But I really don't like the 2-color partners because I saw a great post, I think it was by Cobblepot on Twitter, where he talked about that like when you have 4-color partners, color almost doesn't matter. You're basically running the best cards in each color. He's a CDH guy, so 4-color partner deck and CDH is like all the best cards in each color. And it's basically saying that like color isn't that important. That one last change I'd like to bring up is that like I looked at the list of 5-color commanders that were available 10 years ago, and there were a number.
There probably weren't that many non-sliver ones.
There were more than you think. So 10 years ago, right now there are 16 5-color commanders. And actually, I missed a bunch. So tack on probably 4 or 5. So it's probably about 20 right now, because when I did that Gatherer search, that was by color and not by color identity. So like Nagila's not in there. So probably about 20 right now. But 10 years ago, you had Atagatog, Child of Alara, Chromat, Horde of Notions, Corona, Progenitus, Reaper King, Sign of the Ur Dragon, and 3 slivers.
Okay.
The difference between those commanders and what you have now for 5-color commanders is that those commanders all did a very specific thing.
Right.
3 slivers, a dragon commander. Reaper King is Scarecrow tribal. Horde of Notions is essentially elemental tribal. Child of Alara was removal tribal and still a terrible time to face. Atagatog, Atagatog is a very specific deck. Chromat, just not excited about Chromat personally, nothing against it, but and then like Progenitus is just kind of a big thing that's like hard to cast and hard to interact with. So like the difference between that list of commanders and Nagila, Golos, Sisay Weatherlight Captain, Asika Prismatic Bridge is like very different.
Yep.
And one of the things I don't like is, these 4 and 5-color commanders that say just play all the most powerful stuff with like essentially no drawback. Because, as you increase colors, now decks get stronger. And that wasn't always the case back then. Like maybe they get a little stronger, but it wasn't as noticeable as it is now, I think.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad that they've reprinted or they've printed the next 5 Battle Bond lands, but I think those obviously juice up those 4 and 5 color decks quite a bit because they come into play untapped.
Yeah. The lands don't bother me. Some people get annoyed when someone will crack their foil fetch land into their underground sea and then do something like that. I'm like, I've played on Magic Online for years and years, so I have like all on Magic Online. I have a perfect mana base, all the fetches, all the duels, because you only ever need one copy. That doesn't add that much power to a deck. It makes it consistent, so you're not getting color stuck, but. Mm-hmm. That's not like adding a mana crypt to a deck makes your deck much more powerful. Adding fetch lands and dual lands to a deck doesn't significantly increase the power. It just says you will generally get stuck on colors less. So like, people complain about dual lands. I know they're expensive, but from a power standpoint, those don't bother me. It's the fast mana and tutors are the things that like really up the power of a deck.
Right.
I'm much more worried about those than, if you want to play a chill deck that still like cracks a polluted delta into an underground sea, and that's fine. I don't care as long as,
Yeah.
As long as the next play isn't like Vampiric Tutor and Thassa's Oracle, then we're good. So.
Right. I am 100% with you on that. I do not get worked up by people playing dual lands. I have a few dual lands in there in my decks, and they aren't indicative of the power level of the deck.
Right. Yeah, so kind of wrapping up, it sounds like you like Commander now much more than 10 years ago. You wouldn't go back if that option were on the table. I'm in the same boat of I wouldn't go back either. The things that I like in a game of Commander, I like having the option to build a lot of different commanders. You had way less options 10 years ago in Boros, in Wedge commanders, in everything, really. The other thing, too, we haven't touched upon this, but I'll just mention it real briefly, is that because games are shorter generally now, you can play more games in a night, so you can actually get more games in with different decks. I didn't like being stuck at one game for like 2.5 hours with nothing that I could do to impact the board on turn 15 because I ran out of cards. Like, that feels terrible. As much as I enjoyed Commander back then, I wouldn't want to go back to that either. I like having good tools available now. I can decide how strong I want the deck to be. If I want to draw every single card in my deck, I have the option to do that if I want to, but I know that if I want to play in that like 6 to 7 range that I probably shouldn't do that, but I like having the agency to choose.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely that's a great point. There are different ways of building Commander decks and plenty of tools to choose. So, I mean, I love having the choices,
Yeah. And, for years, people have hounded me about, like, Boros being bad. I can build a Boros deck that will destroy, like, probably 80% of the decks that, like, are out there and the decks that people just kind of have if I want to, right? If I go Goblin Engineer into Winter Orb, I'm probably going to win a lot of games, but no one wants me to do that. You know what I mean? So, like, right. But the choice is in my hands. So, like, if someone's like, hey, I've got this really strong deck, I'm like, okay, Goblin Engineer, Winter Orb, let's go. Do you have artifact removal? And, you know what I mean? That's the choice that I have now, which I like. But generally, like, if you're just like, hey, we're just going to play a fun game of Commander, I'm like, okay, Angel Tribal. See how many angels I can cast. But yeah, so I like that choice. I do like the choices that, modern Commander brings. Do I love everything? No. Golos, little too strong. Some of the 5-power stuff, if you're building the best versions of those decks, can be too strong. And, people are historically awful at Rule 0, so you're not always playing the same game of Commander, even though you wish you were. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
The only thing I would like to just point out that Kaldheim has really surprised me at how many cool Commander stuff is in this set. I was expecting the Commander bonanza of 2020. 2020 is the year of Commander, but as I've been digging into Kaldheim, I've just been like, I feel like the party is continuing.
Yeah, definitely. And, same thing again. I've seen people saying that like, oh, I wish Kaldheim was better. I'm like, if you look at each card individually and what it does, there's a lot of really good cards in Kaldheim. Sure, maybe people feel like something's missing, but, if you can remove bias from the equation, there's a lot of cool cards in that set. I've been playing Redain a bunch. And Redain has been like my new favorite thing. So
yeah, and there's so many new legends. So I was kind of surprised that they didn't pull back on the Commander goodies. But it seems like I don't know whether this is just sort of the new normal or if it's just sort of a byproduct of the set. I guess being kind of Norse mythology driven.
Probably a little of both. I mean, they definitely give us commanders in every set, but also this is the Norse mythology set, so legends everywhere. Have you seen Toralf yet?
Have
He's the red one.
Who?
Toralf.
Oh, the red one.
Yeah, essentially.
I have not seen it in action, but it looks like it probably could be pretty crazy.
It's absolutely insane. I played a Volcanic Offering, basically one-sided board wiped all of my opponent's creatures and still did like 4 damage to their face. It's, yeah, it's going to be ridiculous. But
they've given red some really great tools the past couple of years.
Yeah. Neheb is a card that I run like almost everywhere if I can.
Brash Taunter is one of my favorites.
Yep. If you like burn, that's a great burn card. So yeah, Call to Heim's going to be very cool. Lots of stuff in there, and try not to let people's biases affect your opinion of the set, because I do think there are a lot of cool cards in that set. But wrapping up, anything else on Commander from 10 years ago?
Play to have fun, right? That was sort of the original genesis of the format, right? For everybody to sit down and have some fun. And I think that original motivation for playing Commander needs to continue on into modern day,
Yeah, I agree. I love it. So with that, let's wrap up there. Benny, where can people find your stuff?
Well, I write about Commander every week at Star City Games. So every Saturday I have a new article up there. I know they have a paywall, but everything is free to read after a week. So you can always check in and read my archives. Generally, I write about a lot of new Commanders from the new sets. So if you're interested in Kaldheim Commanders, I've probably written an article about it. So come check it out.
Sweet.
Also, pretty active on Twitter. My handle is Blair Witch Green, and if you go to my profile there, I have a link tree with some links to some of my other content. I have a YouTube channel and a stream channel too.
Very cool. So, Benny, thank you for joining us. This was a lot of fun today. I hope we can do one of these again in the future, because I love reminiscing about the old times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with that, we'll wrap it up. I've been PJ. This is Commander Replay, and thank you all for watching.
Goodbye, everybody.